actually bounce down. Oh great, so I can watch myself teach now. Don't actually bounce down the steps like you were talking about. They actually quantum their way down, which means they go through every possible molecule at once.
Like a quantum leap?
It's basically, except that's a weird phrase they don't use too much. But yeah, they basically quantum leap their way until they find the perfect molecule to be on. And that's why photosynthesis is so much better than like your own solar calculator. Yeah. Mary, take your notes to the camera. That girl looks just like me, but she's tiny.
You said this is the
So this will be, we'll take the test right before we get out there. Right? It'll be the Friday, maybe Thursday, depending on how, because if you have a ton of tests, we may move this one up, so we have so much time. But right now it's planned for the Friday before, you know. No, a week of Thanksgiving, we would, I mean, y'all can barely make it a weekend, right? You definitely can't make it 2 weekends.
Hey, let me know if it turns black.
I don't know.
Because I need to make
look
sure
on the
I
outline
can screen this one. I just need to make sure it's recording.
So let's look at the title of this chapter.
Wait, Mr. Miller. Okay, so when I was watching videos, it had like a progression of biology, and it was like the progression that we are doing. But after this, it had evolution. Are we gonna talk about like evolution at all? Like
Yep.
not even we are.
Yep. We're gonna go through. I'm gonna probably tell you about it for about 3 to 4 days. We'll discuss evolutionary theory, some of the theories that go along with it, some of the age of the Earth theories, right? We're going to talk about, and then you're actually going to write. You're going to finish up the year writing a paper on some pro-con paper about a topic with regards to evolution.
Do we talk about what is it? It's a form of Darwinism.
Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, but like selective or natural selection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We will absolutely talk about natural selection. We're going to talk about natural
How is that
selection
biology?
today. What do you mean?
How is that biology?
What do you mean?
Natural selection.
Well, it's a theory of how traits change in generation. From generation
Is that
to
what it
generation.
is? Because I thought it was like natural selection was like stupid people doing stupid things and then dying because of it, and people would say like, that's Darwinism for you. That's natural selection.
Right, that's a joke, right? About actual natural selection, right? So here's natural selection in a nutshell. You live in Liberia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a weird gene that makes your cells impermeable to Ebola, right? Ebola ravages through the country. The population has now changed. Who's left in the country? The people who have impermeable cells to Ebola. That was natural selection. That's all it means.
So is it like a legitimate thing? Or
It's
do
a
you
theory.
believe in it?
It's a theory. Well, so it's clear it takes place on small scales, right? So let's say you have a population, you have a community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this community you have some trees that need high quantities of water, and then you have some grasses that need low quantities of water. There's drought. Last 50 years, what's that community going to look like?
Grass.
Grass. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So on that level, it's an undeniable thing. The question is, can natural selection, in other words, there's a difference between trees not being able to survive in the desert and a dog turn into a dolphin, right? And so we'll talk about it. But natural selection is obviously happening. The question is, how powerful is that? Does that make sense? I'll give you, we are right now, breeds of dogs, right? A dog's different than the first wolf it came from. Because wolves that were not aggressive towards people got fed better because the people fed them, right? Over time, that wolf turned into your dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's a selective force.
But not all dogs came from wolves, did they?
Yeah.
How did my dog come from a wolf? Rhodesian Ridgeback.
Right,
Doesn't
so
look or act anything like a wolf.
Well, it looks more like a wolf than a cat does, and it looks more like a wolf than you do, and it acts way more like a wolf than a tree does, right? So it's all, it depends what you mean, right? You can be like, well, I don't act anything like my sister, therefore how can we be related? You act way more like your sister than a frog does.
Yeah.
Right? So it's relatedness is all in comparison, right? If you want to talk about how much they are, compared to what? Your dog is way more like a wolf than any other type of animal that's in the world, right?
But is it possible to say that she's more like something else than a wolf?
Well,
if I said that she acts more like a cat, what if she acts more like a cat than
if she looked more like a cat and acted more like a cat, she'd be a cat. Right? And we'd be like, I don't know what's wrong with John Clark, he keeps calling his dog a cat. So that's what we mean here. Your dog acts way more like a wolf than it does like a flower or a bumblebee. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and we'll talk a little bit about selection today because it's essential to understanding what this topic is, right? And so, what's our title for this? Mendelian genetics. Terrible word, I know.
I can't pronounce it.
Mendelian or Mendelian, pronounce however you want. Pronounce however you want. And meiosis. Now, what does meiosis sound a whole bunch like? Mitosis. In fact, it's going to be super similar to mitosis. It actually has all. It's prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then for good measure, we run them again and do prophase 1, metaphase 2, excuse me, prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, telophase 2. If you look all the back, you'll see all those, but we're not going to worry about that for a little while, okay? Meiosis is going to be important to this, but so is mitosis. What is mitosis?
Splitting up into cells.
So taking one cell and making two cells that are what?
Identical.
Identical.
Where are you going to be
Two
standing primarily? Because
cells. Well, I'll probably just wander around. I mean, it's what she can hear, right?
You can pan.
She does, and it's
You
probably
can
best she
pan.
just keep it pointed at Murray the whole time.
Yeah.
So she can pay no attention to my lectures. All right, so we have this mitosis, which always makes the same thing, okay? And unless something goes wrong, mitosis will always copy the cell, right? You started off, if you remember, as what?
A cell.
One cell. And what did that cell do? It made 2 copies. Then what did it make? 4 copies. And then it made?
16.
8 copies.
Oh.
And then it made 16, then 32, then 64, then 128, then 254, then 526, then 1024, then 248, and then 496, and after that, I kind of forget. So, do you know how many times that happened? You are now a little shy of 1 trillion cells. And all of those cells are, in a sense, copies of the first cell, okay? So mitosis is designed to give us a population of cells that are the same. Unless something breaks, unless something goes wrong. You know, if you have a mole, that's a little spot where something went a little wrong, right? Not hopefully life-threatening. Huh? Freckles can be, although it can be just a weird kind of chimera effect of the DNA. Certain genes turning off, other genes turning on. And this can be our general overall idea. Mitosis makes the same things. Meiosis, as we'll see, is going to make something a little new, and we'll talk about how that works later. But first we need to talk about what we mean by things like genetics, which is a brand new term in the history of mankind, right? Genetics is a very, very recent thing, but everyone's heard of that, right? You've all heard of your genes. Which spelling of genes am I talking about?
G, not J.
M-G-E-N-E, right? So G-E-N-E genes, not J-E-A-N genes, right? Okay. Thank you. So we have these genes for us, right? Now we need to talk about what they refer to. And the first word we're going to look at in these notes is heredity. Everyone's heard this word before, right? Hereditary, right? Hereditary. You've heard of inherit, right? Or an inheritance. What's an inheritance?
Something you
get after your parents
Something passed down.
So it's something passed down, right? But when we say passed down, how do we mean it's passed down? Generation, sure. An inheritance is generally passed down from generation to generation. And so, generally, heredity refers to objects that are passed down, okay? Objects that are passed down. But this idea of passing things down is an old idea, okay? People have always believed that both objects and traits were passed down generation to generation. And they actually weren't mixed. I know it's strange to think about, but if you own a cow, that cow, as much as it belongs to you, it belongs to you because of your own qualities. That was the original idea, right? That's your cow because of your cow-owning quality. Which person would have the most similar qualities to you?
Your sister.
Your child, right? And so therefore, who does that cow next most belong to?
Your child.
Your child, right? So this was assumed to be the same thing. People have always known that qualities and traits are passed down from generation to generation. Now, they've been completely wrong about how that happens until about Well, we can say William Harvey begins to figure out some of what this does, and then really until we get to Gregor Mendel, no one really figures out exactly how it works. So the Renaissance time is the first time they actually figure out, and I know this sounds funny, but that women have that much to do with it. I know that sounds counterintuitive. They believed that only men passed down traits. The women were just a little house. In fact, womb means little house, and so the man's reproductive form would just live in the woman's house until it was ready to come out. That was their idea of pregnancy. That's not, by the way, how it works at all, okay? Lest there be any confusion, that's not how it works. But that's how they believed. Literally, womb was the house. It was the house for the little man, who they amusedly called the homunculus, or little woman. Interestingly enough, I know this is going to sound strange too. They used to believe that a woman was just a man who hadn't tried hard enough when they were little, when they were a little fetus.
Right,
Tried hard enough to do what?
To become a man. There's all these crazy stories from the late Middle Ages and early modern period basically upper class women were discouraged from working at all. First of all, it was a masculine behavior, but that just makes it, to us it sounds like, oh, it's acting like a guy. It was a masculine behavior in that they believed that if the women worked too hard, they would spontaneously become men. And there are all these stories, and they come to us from various authors of, my favorite one is, a mother's walking with her child, and a cart overturns on the child, and the mother is so frantic that she reaches down and lifts the cart off with an unbelievable display of strength, but in that moment she spontaneously becomes a man. Because she finally tried hard enough and finally exerted herself, and literally, as they put it, her internal heat was created to such an extent that she became a man. They actually believed that if the wife was kept warmer, she was more likely to have a boy. Colder, a girl. That's true. Well, actually, that's true only of sea turtles. Interestingly enough, when it's warm, sea turtles have girls. When it's cold, sea turtles have boys. It has nothing to do with humans, though. Okay. This was a theory. It was a very complex time. They didn't know a lot of stuff, and so you get these kinds of ridiculous ideas passed along.
Well, how do they think like girls or kids who look like their moms?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? That is a fantastic question. Why is it that the offspring look so much like the moms? And so the answer, if I remember my Aristotle, was like, only because they spend so much time in her house, right? They begin to look like the mom. And it was really thought that the traits only came from the father. And this is why, that's why property passed that way, right? Property passes from male to male, except in England. England has some weird laws. But in the rest of Europe and the rest of the ancient world, literally, the daughters had no claim to that. In fact, they were almost separate from the line because they could not have, I know it's weird, women couldn't have descendants in their view. I know, it's wrong. It's wrong.
Why is it that like genes or looks seem to skip generations sometimes?
Yeah, that's one of our myths. We'll talk about why that's pretty inaccurate.
Because like my dad doesn't look anything like either of his parents, but he looks just like his great-grandfather.
Yeah, it's more that there's just some traits you're seeing, right? That things don't skip a generation in that way, but we'll talk about how that works. But we first need to figure out how genes work, period. To figure out why we see things like recessive genes like red hair, people say they skip generations. All that means is that they're recessive, so they don't always show up throughout the lineage.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I want you to think about this biologically for just a second. We're talking about heredity. When we talk about heredity, biologically, right, we're talking about the things passed down to you biologically. We're not talking about homes, we're not talking about houses, we're not talking about names, we're not talking about shields, right? We're not talking about anything other than your biological traits. We taught this. What were you originally?
One
cell.
One single cell. But you can think about it this way. What were you before you were just one cell?
An egg.
And
A sperm.
you were two cells, right? And who those two cells come from?
Your mom and
Mom and dad. Now, what were they originally?
Cell.
One cell. And where did that come from?
2 cells.
Grandma and grandpa, grandma and grandpa. And who did grandma and grandpa come from?
Great-grandpa.
Great-grandpa, 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 great-grandma, great-grandpa, great-grandma, great-grandpa, great-grandma. Was that 8? I think that was 8. Right? So, that's going to be where they came. So, we're literally talking about in heredity, we're talking about the cells you've inherited, right? The inheritance, not necessarily cells you inherited, the line of cells, right? So when we talk about lineage in biology, we're talking about a line of cells, right? You were one cell, which came from a mini cell thing, which came from one cell, which came from two mini cell things, which came from one cell, and so we can go back, and so we know that these cells, being the basic unit of life, are in one sense our lineage, okay? Now let's go back for just a second, I haven't gotten out of the way, to the theory. Kaylee asked a great question. How on earth can you explain the fact that kids look just as much on average like their moms as they do their dads if only dads contribute reproductive material? It was a stupid idea, by the way. It was one of the many stupid ideas of heredity. The next theory they come up with is a much, much more convincing theory. In fact, you're going to think it's right at first. In fact, the other class thought I was saying that this is what's happening. It's not, but this one's very persuasive. It's called, the only words I didn't erase right here, the blending theory of inheritance. Or rather, it's described as that, the blending theory. What do you think blending means?
Mixing them together.
Blending together, okay. So here's the easy one. Tall daddy, short mommy, what do we expect the kids to be?
A medium.
Medium, right? Does that make sense to us?
Yes.
Let's think about it again. Mom's got blue eyes, dad's got dark eyes.
Green.
Kids have green eyes, right? We think that's how it works. Mom's got black hair, dad's a blonde, the hair will be brown. That makes sense to us, right? That makes sense. The blending theory makes a lot of sense. Sure, however much tallness dad has compared to however much smallness mom has is going to balance out and give us something right in the middle.
Would this be under heredity?
So we're just talking about heredity yet, right? Just still talking about heredity.
Wait, could you if they're saying this, were they saying you get one height gene from your mom and one from
They know anything
dad?
about genes, right? They know anything about genes. They thought you got tallness, right, from both parents. And that tallness would average. Does that make sense? Now, this is such an incredibly strong theory. There are still people today who believe it without even knowing it, right? This is such a strong theory. In fact, all kinds of problems come out of this. The idea that blending is bad. So let's say you are a king. You are a king, well, we know you're a king because you killed the other guy who wanted to be king, right? But at the time, the kings would teach, I am a king because my blood is kingly, right? I have kingly quality to me. And so therefore, if I have a kingly quality, in order to have a kingly son, who will I have to marry?
Kingly woman.
Right, another kingly person, another royal person, right? Which is why it was illegal for royalty to marry people of low class. So think of this, what kind of child would you get if you had a high class person and a low class person?
Middle class.
We call it middle class, but sure, medium class. Right, this was literally the theory. You are not allowed to marry outside your class because it would dilute the pool, right? Now, we think that's ridiculous, but even just, actually, I'm sure there are people alive today who believe that if people from other races intermarry, in fact, interracial marriage was illegal in Alabama until 1970 something, right? And I know people from that era who still think that if people from different races get married, you have blended and therefore diluted the pure white blood. There's no such thing as pure white blood. White people in America are mutts. But they
Whoa, hey, whoa.
Yeah, you don't have a clear lineage of anything.
Yeah, I don't believe I have a clear lineage. I'm not a
That's not
mutt.
mutt.
Yeah, you are a mutt. Okay, so you know what mutts are? They're the dogs who aren't horribly inbred. Because all the breeds of dogs
Mutts are good.
have their
So
sisters
we're
and brothers
inbred?
reproducing.
Good.
That's how you get a lot.
I don't want to be inbred.
Yeah, so that's a mutt, right? A mutt is
I don't
not
want to be a
inbred.
mutt.
Too bad. You're a mutt.
I might no, but okay. I'm Anglo-Saxon. I'm Anglo-Saxon.
Right. Even that's the Angles and the Saxons, right? But even the name is a mutt.
And
name.
German.
And right, and so now you're Juten Picts, and now you've got all that in there.
Juten
So
Picts?
Those are different tribes, the Angles and the Saxons. Right.
In
So
Germany.
trust me, you're a mutt.
Are you a mutt?
Oh yeah.
He is a mutt.
Is it not
partially true, because if you do have a white and a black person get married, the baby's brown.
Actually, not always, right? Not
Light
always. And once again, that's not, as we'll learn, that's not a dilution, right? There is actually no whiteness, right? In fact, there's just genes for dark pigments, and if you have mutated broken genes, then you aren't dark, right?
Like albinos?
So you know that. So whiteness is broken genes, right?
Okay, so the whiteness breaks the blackish.
No, 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 no.
We all know
no.
that.
No, 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 no. So, okay,
Then
so.
why is the baby brown sometimes?
Okay, so they have fewer broken genes, right? They have fewer broken genes, so they get some working genes from the dark-skinned parent, and they get fewer unworking genes from the light-skinned parent. Rather than two orders, basically, of broken genes, right? They get one set of working. And by the way, that's way, way oversimplified, right? It's not anywhere near that close. And sometimes you have people of dark skin who have very light-skinned children, and sometimes you have people of very light-skinned with very dark-skinned children, because there aren't really biological races.
Oh,
right?
like Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, how they
We
have
don't
like
need to
the-
name people. We don't need to name people.
But-
Seriously,
So-
We all have, like,
their
tan-
skin
this is
color.
tan.
Right. So once again, it's
cool.
so complicated, right? It's so complicated. It's not a blending effect.
So do albinos have like tons of burgundy?
Well, they have a mutation that doesn't turn on their genes for color,
Are
right?
those real?
What?
Albino?
No, they're mythical.
Albino people, yes, so albino.
No, I've seen an albino.
Yeah, I know, I was
Okay, so, we have, quiet up. So we have this blending theory of inheritance, and let's be honest, it sounds convincing. People still, in fact, the whole idea, the whole Nazi idea of racial purity was based on the idea that Jews and gypsies and handicapped people, their badness would infiltrate the gene pool, would infiltrate the inheritance of the Germans and ruin them.
And black
by the way,
people, right?
Mendel is German, or pretty close German, and the Germans were the first ones to understand how this actually worked, and they still got confused about it, and it turns out they believe in the blending theory. Because there's a huge, huge problem with the blending theory, okay? Does anybody know what it is?
That some parents have brown eyes and some that their kids have blue.
Okay, it's very easy, or maybe a more obvious one. Have you ever known, maybe one of your friends is way taller than everyone else in their family,
Thomas.
Yeah.
right? In fact, Thomas brought this up in another class. You have someone who's way, but here's the thing, if the blending theory is true, and your dad and mom are both 5'7", what should you be?
5'7".
Does that always happen?
No.
In fact, I want you to think about this even more. If we did have this blending, if we did blend, after a few generations, how tall would everybody be?
5'7".
They'd all be exactly the same height, right? So everyone would be exactly the same. That's the thing about the blending theory. You have something which is called, and it was discovered or realized in the 19th century, regression towards the mean. Which means that if you have an average quality and you have a blending aspect, everything goes to the middle. I want you to think, let's say we have somebody who's really tall, the tallest man in the world, right?
Oh, that guy was like...
Whoever he marries, she'll be shorter than him, right? So all his kids will be
Medium.
shorter than him, right? They'll be tall, but they'll be shorter than him. But when they get married, to shorter people than them, everyone will be what? The kids will be even shorter than them, and each generation will get shorter and shorter. Same thing with small people, right?
That's why we're all getting shorter.
No, we're all getting taller, Margaret.
We are? No,
Yes,
like, if
yes.
you look at the, if you look at the grade below us,
Says-
we're taller.
Yeah, no. This is not a group. You cannot draw any conclusion from Eastwood School. There's way too few people, and they're way too select a population. You're just looking at southern middle-class white people. You can't draw a conclusion about our society from that. What?
There's like one black person at the school and 3 Chinese
Okay,
people.
we'll settle. All right. Shh. We'll settle race later.
So what does regression mean? Which part of
It means that if things blend, they head back towards a medium state, a middle state. I want you to think of it. Let's say, so let's go back. We have an individual. Their dad is tall. Their mom is short. But let's go back another generation. If their mom is short, that means one of her parents had to be
tall,
and another had to be.
short.
Well, let's go to grandma. Grandma's now very short. Her parents had to be one
Tall.
and one.
Short.
And what would that great grandparents have to be?
Colin.
So eventually, that's right. Eventually, we get to microscopic people that way, right? To explain it. Otherwise, everyone's the same height. That's the only way to explain these differences in height. Is you have to have. So this blending theory, although it seems to make a ton of sense, actually does not work. It cannot work. Does that make sense to everybody? There's no way for this to work. Once people started realizing this, they began to look around for other and better options. Now, this doesn't actually really happen until a very important individual, we may think of him as a villain, but many biologists think of him as the father of modern biology, Charles Darwin, right? And what did Charles Darwin come up with?
Evolution.
The theory of evolution. So, on a very simple level, what is the theory of evolution?
We all
progress.
Things turn into different things.
That's right. Over time, species turn into different species. Now, we're going to learn much better definitions for that, but that's the idea, you know, right? We like to talk, so the idea that humans and chimpanzees were once the same species, and then one group lived in the jungles and became very good at climbing, right? And the other one lived in the plains, and so had to be able to see over the grass and became upright, and they got better eyes because they could see. That's part of the theory.
That's
of
the
evolution.
theory of why the humans.
Well, it's very, very simplified, but that's the theory of human evolution. It's way more complicated than that, obviously, but that's just a kind of an idea of the theory of it, okay? So, we have this idea that things change over time, but here's the problem. In Darwin's theory, any new changes that showed up, and Darwin thought new changes had to show up, otherwise, in other words, a species can't change unless some individuals change first, because a species is just a bunch of individuals, right? Well, here's the problem. Let's say something went wrong. Let's talk about, think about deer, right? Everybody knows what deer are. Okay, so let's say we have two groups of deer, all right? One group of deer ends up living in an area that just has short shrubs, okay? Now, because the shrubs are low to the ground and because the cover is low to the ground, it'll be better if they're what?
Shorter.
Shorter, so they can hide, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be better if they're shorter. Now, let's say there's another group of deer, and they live in an area with tall trees. It'll be better if they are what?
Long necks.
Long necks, right? Better if they have long necks, okay? And so what Darwin said is over time, the population in the short shrubs will get smaller, and they'll be, have you seen those pygmy deer they have at the zoo? Maybe they'll be pygmy deer, and what will our...
Giraffe.
They'll be giraffes, right? They'll turn into giraffes. That's the idea right there, okay? But here's the problem. If it blends, let's say we do one day have a short deer, what will happen when it, I guess, marries another deer? Right, and so any shortness will disappear. What about the long neck? Let's say we have a long neck giraffe, and he's just got a freakishly long neck, right? He's a teenage giraffe, he's got a really weirdly long neck. But his offspring, if it blends, will have what? Shorter necks,
Are you
right?
just proposing that all teenagers are disproportionate?
No, just you. So we have this idea, and so the reason we no longer believe in blended hair, the reason is because scientists who believed in evolution at the time began to realize that evolution could not happen if blending theory was true. And since at the time, and still to this day, to be honest, it is the dominant theory of biological change. Just because it's dominant doesn't mean everyone believes in it, but it's the most common explanation. This theory of biological change, they began to look for something they called discrete inheritance. Okay, they began to look for discrete. Discrete inheritance would not blend. It would, in a term we're about to learn, breed true.
Wait, so
that's the one we believe now?
So yeah, so this is a more modern one. We're going to tal's about this one, and this is one that Mendel's going to come up with.
Is that the accurate? That's the real, like,
So they're
absolutely
looking for
true.
discrete inheritance. As far as we can tell now, and we're pretty good, we're pretty certain, discrete inheritance. And here's the difference between blending and discrete, okay? In a blending inheritance, you have, let's say, the color blue, right? And you have the color red, and when we mix them together, we get
Purple.
That's blending, right? Discrete inheritance would say, no, blue is, in a term we'll learn, dominant. Have you heard this before? So we have blue and we have red, and what will we get? Blue. Do you see? That's discrete. It's inherited directly. Now,
So is
that's
it like
not
that-
how everything works, but it is how a lot of things work. We're going to look at how that works a little bit later.
I've seen like charts of if you got married or reproduced with somebody with the same color eyes, and then like
Right, they have no idea. That's the thing. Those things are scams, right? They
Really?
can guess, but eye color is way more complicated than they thought, right? It turns out you have at least 3 genes we know for eye color, and then you have one gene that can turn off 2 of them, so it doesn't matter if you have the genes, they won't show up, right?
Mhm.
And then there's another gene that can turn them all off, and then turn on a different gene. So eye color is more
we
complicated than we thought.
can mutate, or genes mutate, right? Are we able to mutate genes?
Yeah, but not to do anything really useful yet.
We can't like change an eye color.
Usually when we mutate genes, we cause a cancer. Right?
Oh,
Never
and
talked
he's
about that.
yeah.
So most mutations that do stuff are cancers.
And then also, could you like okay, what is it when your eye? I think you might have mentioned this before, but I don't remember. What is it when your eye color changes? Like, if mine appears different or looks
Right,
different.
that's the surroundings and the wavelength of light hitting your eyes.
I got you.
We'll talk about eye color.
Yeah, because mine were blue.
Right, so that can happen as you age, right? So there's, eye color changes as you age, but the day-to-day eye color change has to do with your surroundings, your setting. Okay. All right, so discrete inheritance means we're going to have individual units of inheritance. Now, we now call those units what?
Genes.
Genes, right? And we'll talk about what they are. But there's an interesting thing. As these scientists began to say what could be a discrete unit of inheritance, they couldn't even think of anything. And so they decided to do what scientists do when they have no idea what to do. They start reading all the old papers. They go back and say, hey, I wonder if some lunatic crackpot conspiracy theorist actually solved this problem somewhere in the past and no one paid any attention to them. And so they go back and they start reading all the old papers on inheritance, and they come across, oddly enough, this weirdo paper from some monk living in a monastery declaring that he's discovered discrete inheritance. And as they read this guy's article, they're like, wait a minute, how did no one notice this? This explains everything. This is exactly what we need. And that guy's name was?
Gregor
Mendel.
Mendel.
Gregor Mendel, the monk. That's right, the monk and the pea plants. Do you remember this maybe from? Okay, we're going to talk all about that, I'm guessing tomorrow, because we've got 1 minute. But Gregor Mendel is going to be the guy who has the first theory that explains discrete inheritance, and his explanations will be, although not perfect, they'll be so much better than the blending theory. And now we base all our theories off of his, although it's been added to drastically over the years. We understand way more about inheritance and genes than we did before. We now actually know what they look like. You can now, for $200, get your own genome. You can actually read all your own genes if you send it off to me in 23, if the government doesn't shut them down, of course.
Is he German?
Yeah, I think you'd like
You gotta
it.
do it
From one of the
quick,
German
then.
states. There is no Germany in